everybody. Welcome back. We're going to take a look at another aspect of photography, and we're going to focus on shutter speed for the next two assignments. So for this one, we're going to focus on how to freeze motion. The important concept to understand when you're talking about freezing motion is that we're looking at when you open the shutter, you expose the sensor to light, okay? And the longer you have the shutter open, the more chance you have for something that's reflecting the light to move across the frame, which then becomes a smear or a blur. So if you open the camera for 3 seconds, and in that 3 seconds somebody walks across the whole frame, what there'll be is just a streak of color going across the frame. However, if you take that same picture, but you only open it for a very small fraction of a second, they basically haven't moved across the frame while that was happening, and they become sharp. So generally when I'm trying to freeze motion, I'm shooting at about 1/500th of a second or faster, depending on the motion. If it's somebody walking, you can maybe go down as low as 1/160th of a second, 1/250th, somewhere around there. Let's take a look at some pictures that I shot to freeze motion. I was specifically trying to capture that kind of action. So right over here, and let me scoot over a little bit so that I have space for those to come up. Right over here. The first one is a wiener dog jumping into the ocean, and you see all the individual drops of water. It's actually a little bit out of focus. Like I think I focused in front. Like this is the sharpest part here. So he's moving that way. He's moving away from the camera, and this is an old picture. I couldn't keep up with it. So that's 1/1000th of a second at f4.8. ISO 250. So even though there is blur, the blur is focus blur. It's just because I screwed up the picture. Not because the shutter speed wasn't fast enough. This one is a dolphin riding the wake on a boat. So this was, I shot this in New Zealand on a whale watch out of Auckland. And this is 1/250th of a second at f6.3 at ISO 320. And here, you can see there's some blur. Like this is motion blur here, but it's not too bad. And what I like about it is it actually gives a little bit of sense of the speed that it's moving. It's sharp enough that it doesn't feel blurry. It's a little bit surreal with the light on the water and stuff. But the main thing is that you can see each drop of water coming off. So if I'd shot at maybe 1/1000th of a second, you wouldn't have those streaks in the water here. It would be all frozen. This is also from my New Zealand trip. This was all back in January 2007 or December 2006. I don't know, something around that. Here's a sea lion on the beach, 1/800th of a second, f6.3, ISO 200. And he was just lying there like a lazy lump. And every once in a while, he would flip the sand up with that flipper just to cover himself in sand. So I thought that was kind of cool. I sat there and waited for him to do that and then fired off a shot. And probably a fairly long lens because apparently sea lions can run like 35 miles an hour on a beach, and they chase down dogs sometimes. At least that's what they told me. This is the first wedding I ever shot. It's 1/400th of a second at f8. So the thing that's frozen mostly is you can still see individual droplets of water from the fountain. It's a little bit blurred out, and it's not as frozen as it could be, but it's not streaks. It's not as when we get into the slow shutter speed stuff, when we're looking at long exposures of a second or more, then if we'd done that, these would just be like lines of water. And you wouldn't see any of the detail there. This is 1/1000th of a second at f5.6. It's also a composite. So the original shot was just the wiener dog chasing the tennis ball. And then a couple of years later, I was like, hey, it'll be funny if I try to make my son riding him. So I put him on one of those big bouncy balls with the handles, you know, boom, 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 and said, pretend like you're riding him. We tried to get the light right, and then I just cut the two together. But again, it's pretty sharp. There's a little bit of blur, but you can see like the individual grains of sand getting kicked up, and that's at 1/1000th of a second. I probably could have increased my ISO and then doubled my shutter speed and gotten even less motion blur there. But the main thing is the dog is pretty sharp, and he's running like the wind. He was a fast wiener, and that was in his prime. Wiener dogs chasing each other on the beach. ISO 500, f5.6. 1/500th of a second. ISO 800 at f5.6. This is a different kind of day. It was cloudier, so the light is very different. But you can see one of the things about freezing motion is they only have 1 foot on the ground each, and hers is not even really supporting any weight. So that's that kind of motion, like you can't do that without freezing the motion. This one's actually a bit of a cheat because it's 1/200th of a second, which is normally not fast enough, but I also had a flash which changes the light, so we won't get into that. But the idea of the shot is with them flying through the air like that, that's only works if you freeze the motion. Again, this is a flash lit shot with a flash from the side, and we put dust in her hair. Well, actually, we put baby powder in her hair. And they were like, flip it like that and we'll get like cool stuff. And she had glitter in her hair. This was for finesse. The theme was dust on the shelf, or gathering dust, collecting dust. They always yelled at me because I could never remember what it was. But it was all about dust and stuff. So you can see like the glitter particles and stuff, and the flash lights it up. 1/250th of a second. Because he's moving straight at the camera, it actually doesn't, to the camera, it doesn't register as much motion, so I was able to freeze that with a fairly slow shutter speed. Also, he's crouching like he's just about to start running, so he hasn't hit full speed yet. 1/6000th of a second here. This one was really trying to freeze those water droplets. And if you look, when I zoom in, they are definitely individual droplets with no motion blur on them. So 1/6000th of a second did that job. And that was the polar bear just coming up and like doing that thing. And these seals in Maine are, it almost looks like they're getting the splash from the polar bear. But yeah, they're kind of doing that thing to get away from the rocks. 1/1600th of a second. So basically, with these kinds of action shots, what I do is I set the shutter speed as fast as I think I need to make it to freeze the action. And then I just probably open the aperture up as wide as it'll go, and then give me the lowest ISO I can to get the shutter, to get the image quality that I need. So I set the shutter speed, and then I figure out the other two just to make the exposure work. There's 1/1000th of a second f4, and it's like that moment of terror as he's running from the waves. That's what I was trying to like capture with that. Ah! And then here he is a couple of years later playing baseball. 1/800th of a second. The ball is out of focus because it's closer than the camera is, but it's not got any motion blur on it. 1/1000th of a second, following this egret in flight. 1/1000th of again. When I'm shooting birds, generally I start at about 1/1000th of a second and I go up from there. You can see there's actually some blur on where the bird's wings were flapping, because the flapping goes a lot faster than anything else. Great big birds you don't need as fast because they move more slowly. Little teeny birds, you got to go crazy with your shutter speed. So this heron is 1/750th of a second. I probably could have slowed that down if I wanted to, but I didn't need to. I was at ISO 280, which is very low and allows good quality color and stuff. And there he is again at 1/1000th. This time he's flapping a little harder, so there's some more blur on his wings there. And then a seagull at 1/500th of a second flying over the ocean. That's all there is to it. If you notice, there's almost always something in the air in all of these pictures. And I do that because it tends to indicate that it's moving really fast. If you take a picture of a car on a road and everything is sharp and nothing is blurred out in any kind of motion, how are you supposed to tell the car is actually moving? It could have been parked there. So, whereas if you took a picture of a car jumping off a ramp, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's definitely frozen. So when you're shooting your own, find ways to make it obvious that you've frozen some kind of motion. And they should be kind of fun. So play with those. Let's see how they do.